In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King and Kosovo's President discuss forging close ties between Jordan and Kosovo and regional issues. The UN Security Council votes tomorrow on a draft resolution on access of humanitarian aid in Syria, where fighting continues without let-up. And European foreign ministers agree to impose sanctions on Ukraine, where the deadly violence has escalated. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King and Kosovo President Atifet Yahyaga held talks and agreed to work for bolstering relations between Jordan and the Republic of Kosovo. King Abdullah and Yahyaga, who yesterday began a several-day official visit, said they hoped her trip would be a major step to build close cooperation, especially in economic, trade and investment fields, and exchange expertise towards forging a fruitful partnership. Also on the agenda was the situation in the Middle East, including the ongoing US-brokered Palestinian-Israeli negotiations to bring about the two-state solution. The King stressed Jordan's firm support of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital as a higher Jordanian national interest. King Abdullah and Yahyaga agreed on the importance of a comprehensive political solution to the Syrian crisis that includes all Syrian people to spare the region from the catastrophic consequences of the conflict. In this context, His Majesty referred to the pressure on Jordan posed by hosting the largest number of Syrian refugees and providing humanitarian aid and services to them. The Kosovan leader said her country looked forward to broadening cooperation with Jordan and building a partnership. She also spoke about Jordan's outstanding and historic support of the Kosovan people and their just causes, including the kingdom's contribution to UN peacekeeping operations there over the past years. She said Jordan was one of the first nations to recognize Kosovo's independence. Yahyaga commended Jordan's Middle East peace efforts, its care for Syrian refugees, and the king's efforts to clarify the true image of Islam. Upon her arrival at the Royal Palace in Humar, the Kosovan leader was accorded full honors, with His Majesty leading senior officials at an official welcoming ceremony. The King and Yahyaga were greeted by a guard of honor as the guest was accorded a 21-gun salute. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour also met the Kosovan president. He said Jordan is interested in cementing relations with Kosovo in various fields, pointing to prospects for cooperation in tourism and other fields. The Kosovan president said her country was also interested in strengthening ties with Jordan, voiced her gratitude for Jordan's support. President Yahyaga extended an invitation to the Prime Minister to visit Kosovo. Yahyaga also visited the Martyrs Monument, where she viewed contents depicting the kingdom's history since the start of the Great Arab Revolt and the development of the armed forces. His Majesty the King met a delegation of the Defense Subcommittee of the U.S. House of Representatives Appropriations Committee, led by Rodney Frelinghuysen. Talks dealt with means to forge closer ties between Jordan and the United States, as well as efforts of the members and committees of the U.S. Congress to help the kingdom in addressing challenges posed by regional crisis to the kingdom's economy and limited resources. King Abdullah and the U.S. team also reviewed efforts to achieve peace in the Middle East, the crisis in Syria, and international efforts to achieve a political solution in the country. At a meeting with the American delegation, Chairman of the Senate Arab, International and Expatriate Affairs Committee, Senator Samir Rifai, thanked Washington for its support and said Jordan is interested in forging deeper ties. Frelinghuysen commended Jordan's leading role in the region and said a stable Jordan is key to regional political stability. The UN Security Council will likely vote tomorrow on a draft resolution to boost humanitarian aid access in war-torn Syria. It was unclear if Russia and China would support or veto the Western and Arab-backed text. As the UN is due to vote on a draft resolution, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said cross-border humanitarian aid to Syria should be in accordance with the international humanitarian laws. This report has more.
The UN Security Council is scheduled to vote tomorrow on a draft resolution to boost humanitarian aid access in Syria. But it is unclear if Russia and China would support or veto the Western and Arab-backed text. Jordan, Australia and Luxembourg finalized the draft, which includes demands for cross-border aid access and an end to shelling and aerial bombardment. It also threatens further steps in the event of non-compliance. The Syrian crisis was top of the agenda when Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki in Baghdad. Moscow, backed by Beijing, has shielded Syria on the UN Security Council during the 3-year-long civil war. They have vetoed 3 resolutions condemning Syria's government and threatening it with possible sanctions. Lavrov said Russia would block the adoption of a resolution that allowed aid convoys to enter Syria without the consent of the Damascus government. He also warned that the draft resolution should not be politicized. China urged for a political solution in Syria and was actively participating in the process of producing a resolution.
We believe that in the current circumstances, the action by the Security Council should be conducive to pushing for the political solution to the Syria problem and should be conducive to pushing for the 2 parties in the Syrian confrontation to continue to engage in talks and dialogue. The relevant action should also respect the UN's guiding principles of humanitarian aid and adhere to a just and neutral principle.
US President Barack Obama said he was not keen on reviving what he called Cold War chess game with Russia over Ukraine and Syria.
Our approach as the United States is not to see these as some Cold War chessboard in which we're in competition with Russia. Our goal is to make sure that the people of Ukraine are able to make decisions for themselves about their future, that the people of Syria are able to make decisions without having bombs going off and killing women and children, or chemical weapons, or towns being starved because a despot wants to cling to power.
Syria, however, agreed to abandon its chemical weapons under a deal proposed by Russia and hashed out with the United States. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
The Syrian diplomacy is underway. So is the bloodshed. In the northern city of Aleppo, a building was bombed and shelling could be heard in the Sheikh Najjar suburb from mortar launchers with the flag of Ahrar al-Sham group. Bombing was also reported in the southern town of Dir'a with people running around, some trying to remove rubble and a man carrying a victim to a car. In Damascus, rebels said government tanks shelled from up a hill around the village of Sahel with explosions and wild smoke rising. In the north, a car bomb explosion tore through a Syrian refugee camp at a border post on the frontier with Turkey, killing 5 people and injuring dozens. 2 people were killed in the Lebanese city of Tripoli, including a military commander from the Alawite minority shot dead on his way to work. Gunmen killed Abdurrahman Yusuf, a military leader in the pro-Arab or Syrian Arab Democratic Party from Tripoli's Jebel Muhsin district. Tripoli, Lebanon's second largest city, was tense after the shooting, with schools shutting their doors and many people keeping away from sites of potential clashes. The Syria war has fueled tensions between Alawites loyal to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government and Sunni groups sympathetic to the uprising against him. Today's violence followed a twin suicide bomb attack in Beirut yesterday, which targeted the Iranian Cultural Center and left about 10 people dead. A group affiliated with Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for the attack, describing it as a reprisal for the intervention of Hezbollah group and Iran in Syria. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry were due to meet in Paris again today after a 2-hour discussion of Palestinian-Israeli peace the day before. A senior U.S. official said Kerry and Abbas had an in-depth discussion about the core issues and agreed to continue the discussion today. The Palestinian-Israeli peace talks resumed on July 29th after a nearly 3-year break. American officials say Kerry is trying to forge a framework for the negotiations as a first step, and that they still hope to hammer out a full agreement by an April 29 deadline. Such a framework could sketch the outlines of an accord to resolve the decades-old dispute, whose main issues include borders, security, the fate of Palestinian refugees, and the status of Jerusalem. European Union foreign ministers agreed to impose sanctions on Ukraine, including visa bans, asset freezes, and restrictions on the export of anti-riot equipment. The restrictions will apply to those involved with ordering or orchestrating the violence in Kiev that has left nearly 67 people dead. Ukraine's parliament convened for an emergency session as fresh deadly fighting flared in central Kiev. The violence shattered a truce declared by President Viktor Yanukovych as the Russian-backed leader met European ministers demanding he compromise with opponents. Here's more.
The death toll rises as new rounds of fighting break out in Ukraine. The lobby of the Ukraina Hotel in Kiev has turned into a morgue. Authorities and eyewitnesses say the death toll has risen to at least 51 since Tuesday. That number could change as workers continue to remove bodies from Independence Square. The clashes come as the opposition meets with Western representatives who are also in talks with President Viktor Yanukovych. The only opposition leader Arseniy Yatsenyuk wants to see a demilitarized zone.
I would be very frank that the government doesn't control the riot police, and it's very difficult for the opposition to control Maidan, and there are a number of forces who are uncontrolled. So this is the truth. Ukraine is in a big mess.
Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski says stopping the violence is an absolute must.
We've seen these horrific pictures from Kiev, which are some of the largest uses of force in Europe in recent memory. Very worrying. This has to stop.
Sikorski, along with the German and French foreign ministers, will now head back to Brussels, where they will debate sanctions aimed at Ukrainian officials responsible for the escalation of violence.
Egypt put 3 journalists of Al Jazeera television channel on trial. They are facing charges of aiding members of a terrorist organization in a case criticized by human rights groups as a disregard of freedom of expression. The 3 of the Qatar-based network's journalists, Peter Greste, an Australian, Mohammed Fahmy, a Canadian-Egyptian national, and Bahir Mohammed, an Egyptian, were detained in Cairo last December and remain in custody. All 3 deny the charges, and Al Jazeera has said the accusations are absurd. Egyptian officials say the case is not linked to freedom of expression and that the journalists raised suspicions by operating without proper accreditation. The court postponed the case, in which a total of 20 people are on trial, to March the 5th. Explosions rocked 5 polling stations in eastern Libya as voters elected a body to draft a new constitution. There were no injuries in the dawn bomb attacks in the town of Derna, but the incident highlighted the volatile situation in the country. Libyans headed to polling stations to elect 60 members of a constitutional committee who will have 120 days to draft a new charter. The elected members will be divided equally between Libya's 3 regions. The model resembles the committee that drafted Libya's constitution, implemented when it became an independent state in 1951. Libya desperately needs a viable government and system of rule so that it can focus on reconstruction and on healing the divisions opened up by the 2011 war that toppled former leader Muammar Gaddafi. The government of Prime Minister Ali Zaidan is struggling to assert authority and rein in armed militias. The UN Nuclear Energy Agency said Iran's stockpile of higher enriched uranium has declined significantly for the first time in 4 years. Tehran has stopped enrichment activity under a landmark nuclear deal with world powers reached in November. In the report, the International Atomic Energy Agency also indicated that Iran was meeting its commitments under the pact to curb its nuclear work in exchange for some easing of sanctions. The report was issued to member states just hours after Iran and the six powers, the United States, France, Germany, Britain, China and Russia, wrapped up a first round of negotiations in Vienna. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton said the latest round of talks made a good start. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif, who led his country's delegation, also said the two sides had started technical work.
We've had 3 very productive days, during which we've identified all of the issues we need to address in reaching a comprehensive and final agreement. There is a lot to do. It won't be easy, but we've made a good start. In addition to our political discussions, we've started the technical work, and we've set a timetable of meetings initially over the next 4 months with a framework to continue our deliberations. Technical experts will meet in early March, and we will reconvene for the next E3+3 political directors meeting, led by Minister Zarif and myself, here in Vienna on the 17th of March.
Besides the talks that we had at the political level, we have started technical work, and we have also agreed on the time frame to be able to follow the preliminary discussions, and we also agreed on the agenda and framework that will help us reach our aim.
Now let's go to Venezuela, where security forces faced off with demonstrators in several cities in an escalation of protests against President Nicolas Maduro's socialist government. At least 5 people have died since protests turned violent last week, with scores injured and arrested. The demonstrators, mainly students, blamed the government for violent crime, high inflation, shortages of many products, and the alleged repression of opponents. Tensions have escalated since opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez turned himself in to troops this week. He's being held in a jail in the capital, Caracas, and faces charges of fomenting the violence. Maduro, who was elected last year to succeed socialist leader Hugo Chavez, says Lopez and others are in league with the U.S. government and are seeking a coup. Over to the world of style and the first day of Milan Fashion Week. Skin was at Gucci's Autumn-Winter 2014-15 collection as creative director Frida Giannini seemed to delve into the fashion house's origins as a leather goods company. Skinny leather trousers came in shades from powder blue to tobacco. Leather shirts bore ruffle details, and tailored sleeveless dresses featured leather panels on the front. Dresses finished just above the knee and were worn with calf-covering boots in patent brown, black, snakeskin, or leopard print with square, chunky heels. Pleated skirts exposed more jewels in panels underneath. Meanwhile, design duo Frankie Morello gave a rebellious edge to demure silhouettes for its autumn-winter collection, cutting slits into cheerleader-style pleated skirts. Layering was everywhere. Black shift dresses skimmed the body with a glimpse of patterned petticoat peeking out from beneath every hemline. A thin belt hung unfastened from the waist of a demure black smock, topped with a Swarovski crystal-embellished wraparound skirt. Finally, a look at the weather forecast. Cold tonight in hilly areas with southeasterly light winds. Tomorrow, fair weather is forecast for much of the hilly areas and warm elsewhere, especially in the Jordan Valley, where temperatures will be hovering around the high 20s. Winds will be southwesterly brisk. The port city of Aqaba should expect a cool night and warm day tomorrow, with northerly fresh winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To close, here's the reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King and Kosovo's President discuss forging close ties between Jordan and Kosovo and regional issues. The UN Security Council votes tomorrow on a draft resolution on access of humanitarian aid in Syria, where fighting continues without let-up. And European foreign ministers agree to impose sanctions on Ukraine, where the deadly violence has escalated. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name's Ra'ad Labtoush. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.